Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rom.
In our top story, China has brokered the restoration of diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran. In a move that seemed to shock the world, Saudi leaders met with their Iranian counterparts in Beijing and announced the full restoration of relations. Tensions between the two Middle Eastern nations have been high, and Riyadh has accused Tehran of bolstering the Houthi rebels to attack Saudi airstrips and oil fields. Israel has been quietly assisting the Saudis with defense technology to combat the Iranian attacks, and many believe that Saudi Arabia would be the next country to join the Abraham Accords, normalizing ties with the Jewish state. The surprise announcement came from China, where Saudi and Iranian officials announced the reopening of embassies in their respective countries and the imminent exchange of ambassadors.
The U.S. House of Representatives has voted to support Iranian protesters trying to oust the radical Islamic government of Iran. In a rare show of bipartisan support, a majority of members condemned Iran's state-sponsored terrorism and decades of human rights violations while supporting the efforts to topple the mullah's regime. Representative Tom McClintock of California praised the decision, saying 222 members of the House, Republicans and Democrats alike, now stand side by side with the people of Iran who struggle to rid themselves of the theocratic thugs who have oppressed them for far too long.
The Moroccan royal palace has come out hard against Islamists critical of its relationship with the Jewish state. Rabat normalized ties with Jerusalem in 2020 as part of the Abraham Accords brokered by former U.S. President Donald Trump. Since then, the countries have signed several agreements and are cooperating in many areas, including defense. Unfortunately, Islamist elements in the country have attempted to undermine its cooperation with Israel, including the rebuking of the country's foreign minister for what it called defending the Zionist enemy. The royal palace laid out a clear message that foreign policy is the prerogative of the king and that it would not be subject to blackmail.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to assist Israeli high-tech companies affected by the recent collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank. Israel's main growth sector is high-tech, and many Israeli startups held accounts at SVB. The finance ministry has been following the developments closely and has established an interministerial team to formulate a response to the crisis. Netanyahu said he is discussing steps to see if there are any necessary actions to help Israeli companies that have fallen into distress. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich echoed this sentiment, saying, "We stand by the Israeli high-tech companies and will support them in moments of crisis."
Member of Knesset Danon was elected to the International Parliamentary Union's Counterterrorism Committee. This global organization made up of 178 national parliaments held secret ballots for the prestigious position during its recent conference in Bahrain. The IPU's Counterterrorism Committee meets several times a year to discuss global threats and ways to combat terrorism on an international scale. Danon said that his election to this post is firm recognition of Israel's extensive know-how and capabilities in the fight against terrorism.
The Islamic Fatwa Council has issued an official ruling against Hamas, declaring that the terror group violates the laws of the Quran. This reputable body of Shiite, Sufi, and Sunni clerics announced that the Gaza-based guerrilla army's oppression of the Palestinian people is un-Islamic. The IFC said Hamas bears responsibility for its reign of corruption and terror against Palestinian civilians within Gaza. It ordered that its followers are prohibited to pray for, join, support, finance, or fight on behalf of the Iranian-backed terror group.
A rare daytime strike near the Syrian city of Masyaf likely targeted a Hezbollah weapons facility. The Sun, a Syrian state-run news agency, attributed the attack to Israel and claimed that IAF fighter jets fired missiles from a position over Lebanon. The area surrounding the northwestern Syrian city of Masyaf is used as a base for Iranian forces and pro-Iranian militias. It houses the 4000 Institute, where multinational teams of engineers work on Hezbollah's advanced missile project. The Jewish News Syndicate quoted Tal Berry, the head of research at the Alma Center, as saying that the raid likely targeted vital components for the manufacture of precision weapons earmarked for the Iranian-backed terror group.
Republican lawmakers are demanding that the United States Department of Education account for tax dollars used to fund anti-Semitic activities on college campuses. 15 Republican senators penned a letter to Miguel Cardona, the Secretary of Education, demanding to know exactly how much public money is being funneled into anti-Semitic programs and events at colleges and universities. The lawmakers cited examples of university-sponsored functions which featured members of known terror groups, and Middle East Studies programs which failed to teach students the history of the persecution of the Jewish people in the Middle East. The senators also expressed concern that inaction by the Department of Education has caused Jewish students to feel less safe at school.
El Al, Israel's national airline, has announced that it is launching 4 new direct routes this month. In early March, the air carrier began bi-weekly flights between Tel Aviv and Tokyo. Now it is set to launch direct flights to Portugal, Dublin, and Istanbul. We recently reported that the company announced a return to profit. The new routes are seen as part of El Al's expansion strategy to reach their 5-year revenue target of $3.5 billion by 2028.
The Jewish state mourned the passing of Chaim Topol, the Israeli star of Fiddler on the Roof. Topol gained international acclaim for his portrayal of Tevye in Shalom Aleicham's musical and in the film adaptation of the famous play. He won a Golden Globe for his performance and earned Israel's first Oscar nomination in the international film category. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu lamented the loss of one of Israel's greatest artists. He said Chaim Topol greatly loved the land of Israel, and the people of Israel loved him in return.
A coin bearing the oldest illustration of the biblical menorah, which stood in the Jewish temple, is now on display in Jerusalem for the first time. The newly reopened Davidson Center is featuring this rare artifact, which dates to around the year 40 before the Common Era. Dr. Yuval Baruch, the head of archaeology and administration at the Israel Antiquities Authority, explained that this coin holds the oldest known artistic depiction of the menorah, created 107 years before the destruction of the Second Temple.
A record number of Jews visited the Temple Mount during the Purim holiday. Mount Moriah is controlled by the Islamic Waqf, which heavily restricts non-Muslim access to the site and strictly forbids non-Muslims from praying there. Jews and Christians have joined together demanding regular protected access to the holy place, and many say there appears to have been a slight change in the status quo. According to the Temple Mount administration, 453 Jews ascended Mount Moriah during the Fast of Esther and the subsequent Purim holiday, which celebrates the pardoning of the Jews of Persia. Those that visited reported a calm atmosphere. Plans are already underway for the Jewish month of Nisan and the Passover holiday, and organizers hope that even more pilgrims will ascend the holy site.
A group of student archaeologists trekking through the Golan Heights recently discovered a 1,500-year-old carving of a lioness. The group of 23 master's students from the Kinneret Academic College on the Sea of Galilee were on a 3-day hiking trip studying the Jewish village in antiquity. Professor Mordechai Aviam led the group to the remains of an ancient synagogue in En Nashut, near the modern town of Katzrin, where 2 of his students came across the impressive 62-pound basalt carving of the biblical symbol. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Marc Zell. He's the chairman of Republicans Overseas in Israel. Marc, thank you for being on the show.
Great to be here, Josh.
Tell our viewers a little about what is Republicans Overseas in Israel.
Republicans Overseas in Israel is the Israeli chapter of Republicans Overseas International, and we represent Well, something that is close to 400,000 or 500,000 American citizens here in Israel who have the right to vote in American elections. And our job is to keep them informed about voting in American elections and keep them informed about the issues and get them out to vote when the time comes, like in 2024.
You know, when people think about Jewish people voting in America, they think more Democrat or left-leaning, yet in Israel it's overwhelmingly Republican. Why is that?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. We're talking about 80% of Americans who vote in elections here voting Republican, and this is not a new phenomenon. It's something I was able to work on for the past 20, 30 years. And it was originally Democratic, but we changed that. And the reason for that is that people here understand that today, for better or for worse, the Republican Party is really the only the only party in the United States that clearly supports the state of Israel and is on the side of the Jewish people.
We're seeing a lot of support from the Republican Party in the last administration, but also during this administration as well. Ilhan Omar kicked off the Foreign Relations Committee. Why are Republicans standing so fervently with Israel?
Well, first of all, they recognize that Israel and the United States share common values, both political and philosophical and faith values. And it's extremely important that Israel, the American public, which has been traditionally very interested in Israel, very supportive of Israel, has close ties with Israel. It's particularly in a time when Israel and the Jewish people are under attack, both sadly in America to some extent and around the world.
So why isn't this reverberating in America as well? We said, you know, here it's 80% of Jews are voting Republican, but in America it's 70% are voting Democrat.
Or even higher. In the midterms, and we had some good results from Florida, where many Jews voted, a high proportion of Jews voted for the Republican governor. But it's an excellent question, and it's a difficult one to answer, but it has a lot to do with history and preconceptions among the Jewish public and Jewish leadership in particular about the Republican Party. We could discuss this for probably a whole interview if you wanted to. But the fact is that there's this kind of ideological or political inertia that keeps the bulk of the American Jewish community supporting the Democrats, even though the Democrats have largely abandoned Israel and are acting in ways that are anti-Semitic.
You know, it's no doubt that America is the best friend of Israel, no matter who's in the White House. It's because of the foundations that are based on Judeo-Christian values. But we're seeing a very different approach from the Biden administration than we saw in the Trump administration. Can you talk about that?
Well, sure. You can take Secretary of State Blinken's recent visit to Israel, where he professed to have these very warm ties with Israel, but at the same time the message, the subtext of his visit was, you know, Israel has to change its policies regarding judicial reform. Israel has to stop catching and prosecuting terrorists in the West Bank, and look at the Biden administration's policy towards Iran, which is threatening nuclear annihilation of Israel. And the Biden administration continues through Representative Malley and others to court the Iranians, despite all of the Iranians' very, very serious support of terrorism in Israel and around the world.
You talked about Blinken's visits, and he's come to the region several times in the last few months. Why is it important for them to comment on internal issues like our judicial system? Like, why is that even an issue that America cares about?
Well, this is a reflection, I think, of the Democrats' radical swing to the left, the progressive wing of the party, which really determines a lot of Democratic Party policies today. And they have a strong identification with Israel's left, which was defeated very, very dramatically in the last elections we had here. But now that the Netanyahu government has come in and tried to say, thank God for trying to set things straight in terms of balancing the prerogatives and the powers between the various branches of government here, and to put the Supreme Court into a proper place, the whole left-wing establishment in Israel and in the United States is reacting, radically with protests and even threats on the life of the Israeli prime minister. The fact that the Biden administration comes in and interferes with Israeli domestic issues. It's not the first time. In the Obama administration, the Obama administration after 2012, during the 2014-15 elections here, actively supported and opposed the Netanyahu campaign. Fortunately, they were defeated. But this is not new. And you can see it also in the Obama administration's policies towards pro-Israel groups in the IRS, with Lois Lerner and so on. All these folks are still out there, they're still active, and this is their point of view, and Israel is on the firing line.
Mark, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Well, one of the things is that, first of all, we in Israel love the United States. Our hands are tied together with unity with the American people. I'd like to say to the Jewish community in the United States, as well as to our Christian supporters there, that you continue to support, please continue to support what we're doing here. We have a common objective in a world that seems like it's going a little bit crazy. But the United States, you all in the United States, and those of us here in Israel, really are fighting a common battle. And if we hold our line and we keep our values and keep our faith, those Judeo-Christian values you talked about, we will prevail.
Thank you, Mark, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
Up next, the return to Zion with Karen Hayesod.
Shalom and welcome to the Return to Zion with Karen Hayesod. I'm Sam Grundwerg, World Chairman of Karen Hayesod, the leading official fundraising organization for the State of Israel. In the 1990s, we witnessed the biggest aliyah in Israel's history from the former Soviet Union. Once again, the Jews of Russia are streaming home to Israel. Help us bring them back to the Promised Land.
Since the beginning of the 20th century, supporters of Karen Hayesod spearheaded the efforts needed to establish the first independent Jewish state after 2,000 years of exile. For Jews across the world, Karen Hayesod helped forge a new age of hope, making the dream of 2 millennia come true. But at the same time, the Jews living in the former Soviet Union suffered immensely. Religious practice was suppressed, and Jewish national identity crushed. By the 1950s, under Stalin's cruel regime, countless persecuted Jews were executed or sent far away to the gulags. Russia's once thriving Jewish life was no more. But many refused to forget their heritage and God's covenant with the Jewish people. Secretly, they studied Hebrew and the Torah. They covertly practiced holiday celebrations. And above all, they dreamt of returning to the Jewish homeland, to Israel. Aware of the consequences, many still applied for exit visas. Viewed by the Soviet authorities as an act of treason, these brave individuals were dismissed from their jobs, harassed, and ostracized from society. By the 1970s, many leading Jewish activists had been sentenced to long periods in jail for fabricated offenses. But even suffering in the most appalling conditions, they continued to demand they be allowed to go free to Israel. Because of their refusal to give in, they became known globally as refuseniks. Their determination inspired a mass international solidarity movement. Jews across the world, including the supporters of Karen Hayesod and their Christian friends, held mass demonstrations and lobbied global leaders. In the words of the Bible, they demanded, "Let my people go." Refuseniks such as Natan Sharansky became household names. Alongside the likes of Yuli Edelstein, Ida Nudel, and other prisoners of Zion, they became international symbols of human rights and Jewish freedom.
Successful demonstration in those days of Jews who wanted to go to Israel was 5-10 people standing for 5 minutes in the center of Moscow Square with the slogans, "Let us go to Israel." The more people know about demonstration, the more chance that KGB, secret police, will know. Then there will be no demonstration. And the punishment can be up to 5 years of exile. But the idea was that if at least one foreign journalist knows about this, and he will come and he will inform, we are arrested. In the evening it is broadcasted all over the world about our arrest. Next day, hundreds of thousands of Jews all over the world go on their demonstrations, demand from their governments to act. And that's how we were organizing this struggle.
By the end of the 1980s, the pressure began to pay off. Sharansky became the first political prisoner released by Soviet Premier Gorbachev. Sharansky and his comrades were welcomed to Israel as heroes, bringing to life the prophecy of Zechariah, "I will return to Zion and dwell in Jerusalem." When Communist Russia collapsed in the early 1990s, over 1 million Jews followed these prisoners of Zion to Israel. With Keren Hayesod's help, they built flourishing lives in the home of their forefathers. Those who once languished in Russian jails became influential Israeli leaders. Sharansky served as a 4-time minister and deputy prime minister. After being imprisoned for 3 years in Siberia, Yuli Edelstein is now current Speaker of Israel's parliament. Ida Nudel remains a leading social activist and a powerful Israeli public voice. The legacy of the prisoners of Zion will truly continue to shine bright for many years to come. And yet, there's so much more work to be done to help bring more Jews from Russia back home to Israel. Keren Hayesod remains at the heart of this mission. Now is your chance to join us in supporting the next wave of Aliyah from Russia and be part of history in the making.
Let's bless Israel together.
Now's the time for you to get involved. Assist Keren Hayesod to raise the necessary funds in order to bring Jews yearning for their homeland back to Israel. Your donation can help fulfill the biblical prophecy today. To donate and get information, visit our website at www.khisrael.org.
And now, Shining Light from Israel.
Located halfway between Tel Aviv and Hebron, in the foothills of the Judean mountains, is the biblical city of Menorah. Here in Israel's National Park of Menorah, Beit Guvrin, one is able to delve into the biblical landscape that existed here over 3,000 years ago when Joshua and the Israelites laid conquest to the land of Canaan. We also can read in the book of Kings how Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, and his son Rehoboam, who would also become king of Israel, fortified the walls of this important site in order to protect the Israelites from the Plishtim, the Philistines, who lived to the west in areas like Gaza. A tell is an artificial mound that was created by various civilizations building on the same parcel of land. One civilization on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. So follow me up to the top of Tel Menorah. So most of this tell has remained unexcavated, which means under the ground I'm walking on right now lies the ruins and unknown treasures that date back to the Second Temple period, the First Temple period, the period of Judges, the conquest of the land of Canaan by Joshua and the Canaanites. In fact, only a little bit of the tell has been excavated, which has revealed the city walls that were fortified, as we mentioned earlier, by Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, and his son, Rehoboam. In the year 586 BCE, Menorah, along with the temple in Jerusalem, will be destroyed by the Babylonians. The Jewish people will be in exile for the next 70 years. During that time period, another biblical nation known as the Edomians, who lived in what is today the Kingdom of Jordan, will settle here in Menorah. They'll build homes like the one you can see around me now. They constructed it out of chalk, which is what the ground is made out of. However, due to the fact that the chalk would erode rather rapidly, they constantly had to repair their homes, digging the quarries that were underneath larger and larger. These quarries, these basements, if you will, would be used by the Edomians for various reasons. And let's go see some of them now as we descend into the quarry that constructed this home. Wow, this is amazing. As soon as you enter the cave system, you can feel the temperature drop immediately, which is probably why the Edomians utilized these caves during those hot summer months. It must have felt so refreshing to have this natural air conditioning. Come, let's go further down into the cave. Here you can see the rows, row upon row of where they carved out those bricks. In fact, you can still see the chisel marks that they carved out long ago. Now, this particular cave would have been used to store water during the rainy months here in Israel. However, other cave systems were used for olive presses, grain, and other various functions like that. This area would be liberated from the Edomians by the Jewish people right around the story of Hanukkah, around the 2nd century BCE. The Edomians would conduct a scorched earth policy where they would destroy all of their homes and bury everything in the cave systems below. Today, tourists like yourself can participate in a Dig for a Day program with archaeological seminars, where you'll be able to actually dig out the dirt from in the caves, sift through it, and of course discover the artifacts from 2,200 years ago during the period of the Edomians. Menorah would be rebuilt by the Romans as Beit Guvrin. They built a Colosseum and a large bathhouse and a full-fledged Roman city. 5 roads intersecting in this area, making Beit Guvrin a very important site. Thank you for tuning in today, and on your next trip to Israel, make sure to visit the National Park of Beit Guvrin, Menorah.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.